and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, where I discuss true crime and trials. My name's Lindsay and we are carrying on with the Bob Durst trial. I'm getting closer and closer to catching up. And next up is Stewart Altman. Now this is a long one, so I will try and get through it as quick as I possibly can. So he's Emily Altman's husband, and Mr. Lewin asks him if he would consider himself as a neutral and unbiased witness, and Stewart answers with, "You realise that I am Robert Durst's attorney, so I'm not really unbiased." No. At least he's honest. And of course Stewart fought not to be in court. Mr. Lewin spends a while asking him about the conversation he had with Emily regarding her testimony and her getting her dates mixed up. And him and Stewart correcting her. Emily called him the night or the morning of her testimony upset, and Stewart told her her testimony was wrong and that she didn't hear from Bob that he was in LA when Susan was murdered, nor did she hear it from Stewart. Even though Emily has testified to this, he's telling her now that she's got it wrong. Obviously, he shouldn't have told her that she got it wrong. He shouldn't have spoke to her about this. And Stewart is saying that they hadn't had any communications from Bob until after he was arrested in Galveston. So up until the Galveston point, they hadn't spoken for about 5 years. So Stewart is saying basically Emily couldn't have heard it from Bob because they hadn't spoken to him. So Stewart didn't know Susan very well and only met her a few times. He says he didn't have very much personal observations of Susan and Bob together, and he only knows what he knows about her from what he's seen and read. And he isn't aware that his wife Emily did see Bob and Susan together when he wasn't there. But he knows that Susan was one of the two closest people to Bob, and also we can't forget Doug Oliver. And it takes a while for Stewart to say that he too was probably one of Bob's closest friends. I don't know why you wouldn't say that anyway. The last time he saw Kathy before she disappeared was at the end of 1981. And the first time he saw Bob and Kathy together was in 1970-1971. Stewart says that from the moment Bob and Kathy met, they seemed to get along well, and based on his observations, he would describe it as a loving relationship. He never saw any physical violence or any arguing, and he agrees that Bob was the more dominant one in the relationship, and he also knew about Bob's affair. Now back to Susan Berman, and Stewart found out about Susan being murdered when he read it in the papers, although Mr. Lewin is asking him if he remembers that it was Emily that told him before he read it in the newspapers, but he's pretty sure that he read about it. He says that he's pretty sure that after he read about it, that they then discussed it. Now Mr. Lewin asks him if he remembers having a conversation in New Orleans jail with Bob by phone on the 12th of June 2015. He can't recall it right now, but then he says he might be familiar with it. Mr. Lewin then tells him that it's a conversation where Bob tells him that he is not going to take a position about being in LA at the time of Susan's murder, which he now agrees with, but he still can't remember the exact phone call, at which point Mr. Lewin plays the recording.
Meanwhile, we talked about where I was, when and how, and everything. Los Angeles, I had a video pretty off, just as I'm uncertain and uncomfortable trying to take a position, since I keep remembering things differently, sort of. So I never spoken to them at all about where I was, etc. in Los Angeles. Right. It's like 14 years ago, for God's sake.
Now he remembers it. He has in fact discussed this call with his lawyer, where they read the transcript to him. When he is asked if he is aware that Bob had flown out to California right before Susan was murdered, he says he may have read it or saw it on TV. Mr. Lewin then asks this question, Are you aware that Bob has maintained that he was not in LA at the time that Susan was murdered? To which Stewart replies that he doesn't understand the question. So Mr. Lewin asks again, and Stewart says that he thinks it's public knowledge that he stated he wasn't in LA. Stewart has listened to the interview that Mr. Lewin did with Bob in Louisiana jail, but he says he didn't listen to it carefully, so he didn't hear Bob say that he wasn't in LA at the time. So it comes out that Bob is paying for Stewart's lawyers. And at the moment, from when he needed them in New York and up to now, the bill has been around $50,000. Must be nice, mustn't it? Stewart is next asked about the cadaver note, and he knows what it is, and he believes he found out about it through newspapers or news reports. Now he is shown the note, and he says it's similar to Bob's writing, and he has seen in the Jinx where Bob is shown the note and that Bob agreed that it looked like his writing. But he now says that the letters he received from Bob when Bob did write to him were in cursive, and the note is printed. So he only has his memory to go on. He's not seen it printed. So, as Bob's friend, he considers Bob to be an honest person, but he's known Bob to lie when it's to his advantage. So this doesn't really make sense when he says it. He considers Bob to be an honest person, but he's known Bob to lie when it's to his advantage. Well, it does make sense. I mean, he's basically saying that Bob doesn't normally lie, and generally he's an honest person, but then when he's needed to, he lies. So Mr. Lewin obviously calls him out on this, and Stewart continues to dig an even bigger hole by saying that he has also known Bob to lie when it didn't have any advantage. So now he's flipped that explanation I've just gone through, and basically he's calling Bob a liar. So he can be honest and he can be a liar. And he confirms these statements by saying that he knows some honest people that lie, and that's the way he feels. Bob never this guy's a lawyer and he's really not handling being on the stand. So, I think it's kind of a doctors don't make good patients kind of a scenario. Attorneys don't make good witnesses. So Bob never told him that he was physically violent with Kathy, and it would surprise him if Bob had been physically violent with Kathy, which we all know he's admitted to. And he has watched the Jinx, and he did watch the part where Bob admitted to it, but it didn't cause him to question whether he actually really knew Bob. And obviously, this question had been asked prior. Had this question been asked prior to Stewart watching the Jinx, then he would definitely say there was no way that Bob was physically violent toward Kathy. He is then asked about whether it surprised him that he dismembered Maurice Black, which it did, but had he been asked prior to Bob admitting it again, he would have thought, no way could Bob have done that. Which I think is pretty normal. You don't think people you're close to are capable of anything. So when they do actually do something bad and, to the level of dismemberment, you find it really, really hard to believe. Even after they've admitted it, it still takes a while. So I don't really have anything against him for that, because I think that's just pretty normal. So again, with those two things in mind, he's asked whether it made him question if he really knew Bob. And he says that he guesses that he didn't know him 100% and he does question it. Then he is asked whether he would question what else Bob could have done that he might not have expected. And his answer is sure. And he agrees it's a fair statement. I mean, to have done that and be, a person of interest in his first wife's disappearance, and then now on trial for the murder of your best friend, you're bound to start questioning what else could he have possibly done. I truly do believe that Stewart, I think Emily's too love struck with Bob, but I think it has crossed Stewart's mind that Bob has something to do with Kathy's disappearance. I mean, he's a lawyer. So he found out Kathy was missing when Bob called him, and he thinks this phone call happened a few days after she disappeared. He says Bob called him to ask if he had seen Kathy, because he was worried about her. He is asked if he asked Bob for the details of the last time Bob saw her and what happened, and Stewart says that Bob told him that he hadn't seen her since he took her to this train station in Katona and she returned to the city. She was supposed to go to medical school the next day, and he found out that she hadn't gone to school and she's been missing since then. And he then remembers that Bob had called 3 days after she'd gone missing. Stewart can't recall if Bob had told him that he had already reported her missing to the police. He doesn't remember if Bob told him that he had spoken to Kathy at the apartment that night she went missing. But he is aware that Bob originally said from watching the Jinx, and he is also aware that that is a lie. So, he knows that, some bits are definitely a lie. Then Stewart admits Bob told him that, and when he is asked why he said he didn't remember if Bob had told him that, he says he was thinking it might be an attorney-client question and he didn't want to answer it. I hope that made sense. It didn't make sense to me reading it back. So basically, he can't remember if Bob told him that he'd spoke to Kathy that night when she was supposed to have gone back to the city and was back at the apartment. He is aware that that's what he said in the Jinx, and Stewart is now aware that that is a complete lie. So there we go. Sorry about that. Mr. Lewin asks him that when Bob told him that Kathy was missing, did he offer to try to help find her? His answer is no, because he doesn't do those things. And I was sat there, like, you didn't offer to help find someone, your best friend's wife, because you just don't do those things. And what he means by this is that he doesn't find people. He says basically he didn't want to because he didn't think it would help. Bizarre. Oh, wow. Okay, so Stewart is asked if Bob sounded concerned, and he says no. Then he is asked if this seems strange to him, to which he answers yes. But he didn't ask Bob any further questions. Of course he didn't. But despite this, he never thought that Bob could have killed her. It never occurred to him. Obviously, when Kathy didn't come back, he did wonder what had happened to her. This was after a while of her being missing, possibly weeks after. But he didn't call Bob about it and asked him what was going on. In fact, after that initial conversation, he never spoke to Bob about Kathy, which was, Bob never contacting him again about it was strange to him. And the reason for this is that Bob didn't want to talk to him about it. And if he did, he would have called Stewart. This didn't cause him to think that Bob did anything to Kathy, and he actually thought Kathy had run away. He admits that it's very strange that Kathy would run away when she was close to graduating from medical school. So, I get he's been friends with him for a very, very long time, so he doesn't want to think things like that of his friends, but he's surely got to be adding things up by now, and there's no way would Kathy just run away when she was so dead set on becoming a doctor. There's no way when she was so close. Now he's saying that Bob never changed his story after saying that he didn't speak to Bob about it. Now he's saying that Bob never changed his story, which is odd because he's saying he never spoke to Bob again after that initial phone call. So how does he know that Bob never changed his story if he never spoke to him? And he then confirms that his allegiance and friendship is to Bob and not to Kathy. We move on to Douglas Durst, and Stewart knows him personally. He also went to the same school. Douglas was a bit younger than Bob's, but, they all went to the same school. Again, he says that Bob was upset when Douglas was made head of the Durst organisation. Stewart told Dateline that Bob was groomed for it, and that was supposed to be his job. He was upset. It had a devastating effect on Bob. After Douglas was made head of the business, Stewart lost contact with Bob and then didn't hear from him again until he was arrested in Pennsylvania in November of 2001. So he has no clue where Bob had been living up until that point. He found out about Bob and Debbie Chariton when he read it in the newspapers, and he didn't know in advance they were getting married. He also didn't attend the wedding. Stewart also spoke to Charles Bagley. He spoke to him on his own and also with his wife Emily. Oh, I'd love to read what went on there. Stewart is asked about when Emily told Dateline that Bob was trying everything he could to look frail in the Galveston trial. He says he doesn't know where she got that information from. He doesn't think she got this information from Bob, which would have been very wrong of her to do. You know, she worked for Stewart, who's a lawyer, so she would have been crossing the line of attorney-client relationship. He thinks she came to this conclusion on her own and that maybe she'd watched Bob and saw him deteriorating over the months. He says when she was speaking on Dateline, she wasn't doing it as Stewart's employee. She was speaking on her own. He won't say she did it as Bob's friend. So again, Emily's got things wrong. Or has she? A clip is played from when from one of the phone calls Stewart had with Bob when he was in jail, and they are talking about when Bob shaved his head. Bob says that he did that to show his shunt in his head, and Bob says he did it on purpose. And Stewart then says that he was thinking that Bob was showing people that he had a shunt in his head and that Bob was pretty smart. Then Bob says that he was hoping that they would go easy on him because he was so sick. Again, it's Bob. Not surprising, and this is why Mr. Lewin gets so angry with Bob's antics in court now, because he's got a catheter and a catheter bag. He's holding it up. He's shaved his head, you know, and Mr. Lewin knows damn well what he's doing. We all do. We know he's doing it to gain sympathy, to do exactly what he tried to do in Galveston, basically. So Stewart had begged Bob not to be interviewed by Jarecki. And then, right, we find out that, Stewart finds out about the will. So if Bob dies, his millions go to Deborah, and when she dies, it goes to Stewart, then to Emily, and then to their son Howard. And Mr. Lewin is trying to imply that given this situation, wouldn't that affect his testimony? And the fact that he doesn't want to say anything that may jeopardise that. And like I said, prior to this, Stewart had no idea about Bob's will. But Stewart thinks that no matter what he said, he would probably stay in the will. And it doesn't affect his ability to be impartial. So there we go. I mean, to know that you're there, you know, I don't know about Deborah Chariton. I haven't seen her. I don't know if she's in court. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money. But to say Stewart didn't know up until this point, I don't think he actually did. He can't be impartial. He is going to be biased. And I think Emily's slipped up and said things she shouldn't have done. And now Stewart's having to clear up her mess and say, you know, basically he doesn't know where she's got the information she's got, where she's got it from, and why she said it. You know, who knows? I think Emily's telling things that's happened, and now Stewart's having to clean up her mess. So there we go. Sorry, it's a long one, But it's done now, and I'll be back with more in more videos. So until then, bye for now.